Thank you, President. It's a great honor to be here amongst all you fellows and guests and famous scientists, and I hope I can do justice to this podium, which, as we all know, has heard incredible things for the development of science. I will talk today about a work that I have been done and which started here at the Linnean Society, and I think this is a proper place to deliver this talk because it was in 2002 that I started work on this upstairs in the library. I have come as a guest from the Linnean Society and have taken the advantage of being in London to also deliver another talk tomorrow, which you are all invited to come and attend, on my work on Paramos tomorrow at the Jodrell Lecture Theatre. But yes, today I will talk about Jacquin. Jacquin, a French name, but here we see Jacquin in his later days with his ennobled medals of ennoblement by Empress Maria Theresa, a very, very important person in Austrian the history of science in Austria, and particularly of the history of botany in Austria, where he was rector of the university, director of the Botanic Garden. He was director emeritus when in the Napoleon times. Very, very famous, very well known. His life and his works are very well known. But when one comes to look at his biography or what has been written about him, it is unfortunate that what is said about his travels to America, of which we know happened, there's only a very few paragraphs, a very few lines of this. To exaggerate a bit, it's like Jacquin went to America and returned. So when I first learned about Jacquin, and the reason I learned about him was I was working in Cartagena in Colombia on the Caribbean coast, and every now and then the plants that I was looking at, botanizing in Cartagena, they had a Jacques on it, either parenthetical or proper, and more plants. And I was like interested in who is this Jacques? So what we know about his travels to America comes from the preface of one of his large folio works, beautifully illustrated, of which he published many of these, of the Hortus Schönbrunensis, which was the plants growing at the Schönbrunn Botanical Gardens. And in a page in this paragraph here, and since you're both looking at a point with my pointer here, in this one paragraph and a little bit of the next page, this is all that Jacquin mentions about his travels to America. He mentions the date of departure, and he mentions the general localities that he went to, but very little more. And so what has been said about Jacquin comes from here mainly. I was very lucky to go to Vienna in 2002 while I was residing here, working at Kew Gardens, and find this document, which had been seen by several scholars in the archives of the library, Austrian National Library. And it's called the Biographia. It's 106 folios, and it's quite hard to read. And if you're in an institution in the archives, you wear your gloves, you see it for an hour, and then unfortunately you have to leave and go back to work. And so it's been very difficult to see what is in here, but I knew there was a wealth of information. And I was very lucky to have it on microfilm and then print it and then read it or not read it, have it in front of me and gaze at it and not able to read it, but knowing that this was full of information, as we will see, and then try to decipher it. It's written in two hands, at least. This is folio 20 with crossed out text, notes within notes within notes. This is some notes, and just very, very hard. fortunately, so I had it for many years, and fortunately I had the friend of a colleague in Chicago who was from Germany, and we managed to transcribe it, to decipher it all, transcribe it, and publish it in the original transcription in type in German, and also a translation to Spanish. I also met with two friends in Paris who were our genealogists, and with them we were able to track down Jacquin's genealogy to his great-grandfather. This is the genealogy, and as you can see there, from Jacquin's great-grandfather, Jacquin from Vertou in France, that's why the name sounds French, died in 1693, and two lineages, one which went to Leiden. They were cloth makers, and in Leiden there was a good cloth industry, and the other one went to Paris, but finally went to the colonies in Martinique, and held high offices in Martinique. Jacquin's proper lineage, which we see here, and unfortunately there's a small typo there, I'll just change it, lived in Leiden and became, the father married a Van Heinigen, aristocrat Dutch, and they continue their business in cloth, merchandising, and Jacquin was, and so this was the genealogy we sifted out. There's another document at the Austrian National Library where you can find more details about this, but I have been unable to read it. You do see some years which do match to what we have. So there's a lot to be done still in terms of the genealogy. So the family comes from Vertou in France, in Champagne, and moves to Leiden. I found this house with Peter Paas last year when I was in Leiden, delivering a talk on the book. This is the house that the Jacquin family lived in. They had several houses and storage places. He studied at this very beautiful place, the Latin School, where he had a wonderful education. He then went on to study philosophy, but in Belgium, nearby Belgium, but then came back. He didn't like that, so he came back to Leiden to study medicine. At the time, Leiden was, I think, the Mecca of botany. The Clusius Herbarium, the Clusius Botanic Garden, led then by Hermann Boerhaave, the Linnaeus' recent publication of the Systema Naturae, and I think we have this upstairs in its original. Linnaeus' work with different aspects of classification in the Clifford, Ortus Cliffordianum, and very many professors which were very important in Jacquin's education. I have to do something here, just very briefly. Just do this. Please excuse me. So yeah. Something happened. Anyways, Muschenbroek, who invented the capacitator, the Leyden jar, Albin, who was teaching anatomy, and Gronovius, Theodore Gronovius, and his son, which are here. I can't see my notes, which is very unfortunate. Lawrence. So Johann Frederick Gronovius and his son Lawrence Gronovius here, they were of the same age. They studied together. But most importantly, it was Adrian van Rooyen, who was professor of botany at the time, who took on the botanical lectures very early in the morning in the spring. He would take the students to the Ortus Botanicus, and it was during the first class, the first lecture, I believe, where the first plant in the Linnean system, which was growing there, the Monandria monogyna, Costus arabicus, was in flower and was being taught by Van Rooyen, that Jacquin said, botany is my thing. His father died, bankrupt. He went bankrupt and died. And so Jacquin traveled abroad to Paris to work with Lecat and actually did some excursions with Bernard de Jussieu and also took lectures at the Jardin du Roi. And so here we see Jacquin's origin, his two times he went to study in Leuven and Antwerp in Belgium. Rouen was where he met Lecat and Paris, and where his ancestors came from. From Paris, he writes to his friends, the father's friend, Van Swieten, who was in Vienna, who had emigrated from Protestant Holland to Catholic Austria, and was now the medical doctor for Empress Maria Theresa, whom we see here. He wrote to Van Swieten and asked him if he could help him out. Immediately, Van Swieten, who we see here under Maria Theresa, said he would pay for him to finish his studies and his exams in medicine, and would take care of him while in Vienna. And when Jacquin reaches Vienna, he finds a very interesting place, the Habsburg, here with this is the ancestor of Maria Theresa, with a wonderful library, although I think this is a little exaggerated. But her consort, Franz Stephan I, very interested in natural history. He had recently purchased the largest collection of natural curiosities from Florence, which was kept by Bayeux, 30,000 specimens. He purchased the collections and also brought with him the curator to Vienna to hold them in this beautiful cabinet, which was very close to the palace, but not in the palace. The empress actually didn't like to have the merchants bringing him things, and also I think this is a place where he had meetings with ladies, which the empress didn't like to have that near palace. But he was a great natural historian, as we will see further. They also had a summer house in Schönbrunn where they had beautiful gardens, and the emperor purchased on the western side, he purchased some wet areas where he had a botanic garden for collections, and especially for tropical plants with these greenhouses on the side here, and the menagerie or zoo. He had that constructed. That botanic garden was later called the Dutch Garden of Schönbrunn, because the three main gardeners, especially Richard van der Schot, were all Dutch and of Dutch origin, brought to Vienna. And as we can see here, at the time that Jacquin reaches there, the garden and the zoo are empty. He, with his love of botany, he starts looking at the plants that are already in the gardens at Schönbrunn, and one day he meets the emperor. And the emperor sees in him the perfect person to charge him with bringing plants and animals to Schönbrunn. So the emperor writes very detailed instructions, first in his own handwriting, then transcribed here by his secretary, where we have the instructions for Mr. Jacquin that His Majesty is sending to the Americas. Very detailed instructions with specifically what he can and what he cannot do. And again repeating, you must follow these instructions. And I think Jacquin was knew this very well, that if he didn't, he would, that would not be good. So he actually did follow all the instructions very well. The emperor says, do not bring any plant or those plants that the botanist thinks he would like to have in his garden but are not pretty. Bring only the ones that have beautiful flowers or bear sweet fruits. Bring birds, bring animals that are either singing birds or have colorful feathers. As for the birds, do not only bring small birds, bring large birds. So make sure that you have large enough nets. Make sure that you take enough glue. And I was like, glue? Yes, that's how they caught the birds. They put the glue on branches, have another singing bird, lure the other birds, come and catch them. So he knew exactly what he wanted, and he wrote that out explicitly. Then we come back to the biography again, and on folio 16, we see here an entry underlined. Can you read it? Oops. Oh, it's not showing. Well, we have issues with the pointer, but pointer is this one. Can you read the entry? Reise meines Vaters nach Westindien. So it was here on page 16. It's an account of the trip of the travels of my father to West Indian. So this part is certainly handwritten by Jacquin's son, Franz Joseph Jacquin, and there's an incredible amount of detail here about names of ships, dates, particular dates, days of the week, names of the captains of ships, numbers of cannons in ships, etc. That this is written before he died, probably from his deathbed, after being ill for a while, very quickly, and the memory that he had was incredible. This was in 1816 or 1817, and the trip happened in 1754. So here we learned a lot of details about his trip, and we learned that he left Vienna with van der Schott to Trieste and Venice, stopped in Tuscany where he would meet Ginori, the Count of Ginori, who was in charge of financing, and also a very good naturalist, he gave him 2 birders. So the 4 of them, and with all the credit cards or the letters of credit, they left to Pisa, and from Livorno went to Marseille with a minor incident near the Haire. While in Marseille, letters of permits had been sent to and fro for the king, for solicitations from the emperor to the king to have this person go to the French colonies. So meanwhile, he goes to Montpellier, and we know of Marseille as being a very busy port. We know of the company, the trading company that he was with, the Audibert, and which was the company what was to bring his plants and animals later. We know of letters sent to the governor of Martinique by the Ministry of the Navy, where he tells them that this Monsieur Jacquin is going with a botanist gardener and 2 other men, and that he should be let to wander about collecting his plants and animals, but not to talk to anybody nor write to anybody. This was the beginning of the 7 Years' War, or the Sugar Wars. He then goes to while he's waiting for permits, he goes to Montpellier, where he meets Sauvages. Sauvages was then publishing his new method of the identification of plants based on leaf form, and he gets some information from Sauvages that was very helpful afterwards, and that friendship was very, very helpful afterwards. Finally, they can leave and stop in Malaga for fresh water. The governor of Martinique indeed says, "Well, we will do as the Minister of the Navy does," and that the passengers have embarked in Marseille, and then there's a letter that they have arrived in Marseille with Jacquin and 3 domestiques. They arrive in Martinique, and here is a frontispiece of one of the books that he publishes in 1763 about the plants that he collected, with a nice frontispiece with all kinds of plants and objects that he collected and brought to Europe. Whilst in Martinique, over here, he has, as I said before, his cousins, his second cousins, who are very helpful. And he starts collecting in the places where I have starred, as you can see, mainly coastal. And the reason was he had to carry these plants. He had to not collect specimens, exicata, but live specimens. And the emperor said, I want to have these plants in Vienna at a size large enough so that when they arrive, they bear fruit. So they were large plants, rooted and packed, and he carried them in little boats around the coast to a nursery and a makeshift zoo that he had placed in Saint-Pierre. Of the plants that were collected there, we have an original drawing by van der Schot, his fellow gardener. And here we see what was called Alpinia spicata, now Costus spicatus, drawn from life in Martinique. We have in the 1763 edition, upon returning, the engraving of that same, you can't see, I'm pointing here, the engraving of that same plant in a small folio volume. And then in 1780, we will see that he published a luxurious copy of his American plants. And this is, these are to scale, and we see things that are very interesting, which is in the smaller copy, he prunes part of the original. In the larger copy, he puts the leaves back on. So he had all these drawings, as we will learn. He had all these drawings back with him back in Vienna. In his descriptions, he's very keen in noting all the characters and having a thorough description with uses. This one, in fact, is good for gonorrhea in Martinique, but most interestingly, and also, he carried it to the Orto Cesario, to Schönbrunn, where it grew for several years, and it flowered and then died. This is over here. So he had these plants living in Schönbrunn. But here we find something very interesting, which is a very detailed locality data and a phenology. Vidi florentem septembri and octobri. And from that, and the biography and letters, which were dated and placed in their places of origin, I came up with this itinerary, a very detailed itinerary of where he was. And we will go through them as I continue talking. These are plants that he collected in Martinique with their Martinicenses. As I said, he was a Linnean. He used the binomial properly, and several others. One of them, this Ginoria americana, he named in honor of Ginori, the person who in Tuscany was in charge of his finances. Having collected most of the plants in Martinique and around the coast, he then travels to the Dutch possessions in the north, where he also had family from the Van Heinigens, and he collects in Saint Eustatius, Dominique, and Saint Martin. And on his way back, he's captured by English corsairs, and he's kept for a few weeks. And that was actually very fortunate, because it was right then that the September hurricane hit Martinique. And this is the title page of his 1763 book, where we can see a furious ocean and probably Jacquin here, which he may, if we look at his face, we may find out if it is the same drawing that you have, with talking to an Indian. And so he returns to Martinique, and he's very sad because the island has been destroyed by this hurricane. So then he seeks to go to other places, and the next place he goes to is the Dutch colonies of Aruba and Curacao. There he receives letter from his cousins. He actually gets a nice letter, and this is Stafflu, who we know of this, says that the cousin says, we we miss you very much. We want you to come back, especially my sister is missing you. She's dying for your absence, and she actually did die soon afterwards. In Curacao, these islands have been well known for trafficking and contraband for many years. He finds there plants and animals that he wouldn't find elsewhere. And he finds flying foxes. These are all Catesby's drawings. You all should might know them. He finds agoutis. Agoutis, these are from the continent. Flying squirrels, which have been shipped from the Bahamas or Carolinas. Flying fish, turtles, remoras. He finds in Curacao, he finds emeralds from Colombia. These are specimens that are held at the Natural History Museum in Vienna. Rhinoceros horns, platina from Somondoko, etc. So he finds not only his plants and animals, but also curiosities that he was sure that the emperor would like. Trying, I think, to get back to Europe, he then continues on to the French possessions in Saint-Domingue or in Haiti. He goes to the northern part of Haiti, Le Cap, Cap Français, which was then called the Paris of the Americas. He collects plants there, names them, a lot of them after the island. He names one called Aquartia, which is now Solanum, in honor of a friend of his in Martinique. And again, trying to return to Europe, he goes to Saint-Pierre, and on his way, he is captured by pirates. Not once, but twice, and actually, after being very sick of dysentery, and trying to go to Jamaica, he's captured 3 times by these pirates, and the same pirates. But even though he's been captured in these islands of Lago Nav, he has specimens which he collected there. So he was always at work to finally make it to Jamaica, and this is a beautiful map of Jamaica by Patrick Brown, or is in Patrick Brown's. This is Erhard, as drawing of Jamaica, in Patrick Brown's History of Jamaica. And he collects some in Jamaica, but he's told that the best way to get back to Europe is to seek the Spanish flotillas which leave from Cartagena de Indias. These are many boats that gather there, and all the gold from the Spanish possession goes together in big flotillas, convoys. Here are some plants he collects in Jamaica. And the only way he can make it to Cartagena is in a slave boat. He tells horrors of this journey. He has to sleep on deck because the lower quarters were filled with the male slaves, while the teenage girls were all cramped in the cabins. Finally makes it to Cartagena de Indias, and here we have a beautiful view of the Bay of Cartagena and the entrance through the what is called Boca Chica. And upon arriving, he is greeted by the governor in Cartagena. He is able to collect and study plants, but he also finds in Cartagena a wonderful thing. And this we know because of a letter that he writes to Linnaeus. He finds the book of Patrick Brown, the Civil and Natural History, and all of a sudden he sees with envy that all the plants that he thought were all new had already been published. But fortunately, most of these plants, most of the plants published here, do not follow the Linnean canon, and so a lot of these names, not all, but a lot of these names aren't valid to the fortune of Jacquin. In Cartagena, he collects beautiful plants, which are here illustrated in the luxury edition of 1780s. He collects a Jacquinia, Jacquinia armillaris, and then finally is off after trying with many boats. The boats wouldn't take him, the captains wouldn't take him because his cargo was live plants and animals. He sent 7 shipments overall, but this was his last cargo which he carried with him. He stops in Havana. The governor there lets him keep his plants and animals in a place while he waits for the next ship. The people are very curious of all these animals. He names species from Cuba. And finally, he's off to Europe. And he carries live plants, live animals, including these doves. But he mentions in a letter that the doves didn't make it because a cougar that was on board escaped from the cage and ate the doves. And this is actually a cougar, which is kept at the Natural History Museum, and a drawing of a cougar by Franz Schiedel, who was an associate, an artist associated with Jacquin in Vienna, who did a lot of drawings of live animals from Schönbrunn. And I wonder if this may be the same cougar that was kept live in Schönbrunn, as did many of the birds and other animals that were sent by Jacquin. While upon his return, he reaches the southern coast of France, Toulouse, and goes back to Montpellier to visit his friend Sauvages. He stays there a week and carries on to arrive in Vienna down the Danube. When he arrives in Vienna with his last cargo, he suddenly receives a letter. Viro experientissimo, or as we see here, Viro clarissimo experientissimo Jacquinio, from Linnaeus. And the letter starts talking about all these plants. Well, first of all, he calls him the ambassador of flora. He greets him and he says, I want to know all about your travels, all about your work. But specifically, Linnaeus starts talking about individual plants that he had brought, not only with the Latin names, but also with the common names. So there's a camahonduro somewhere here, which is an apocynaceae, that's a common name in Colombia. I want to see your camahonduro. And one wonders, why did Linnaeus do this? Well, it was Sauvages who, the day that Jacquin leaves Montpellier, writes to Linnaeus saying, this person, this is the letter from the Linnaeus, yeah. And these are the camahonduro. So this is a lente faseolide, and then the camahonduro is somewhere down here. So these are details. So it was Sauvages who, the day that Jacquin leaves, writes to Linnaeus, telling him of this de Jacquin, who has come from America with 350 illustrations of plants. Jacquin didn't make Exicara because when he was in Martinique, the ants, white ants, he called them, ate them. So, Jacquin has arrived with all these plants, and he talks about the details of all these plants, these agave, and then Jacquin replies to Linnaeus. This is the first letter from Jacquin to Linnaeus, where he a short introduction, but then immediately goes on to talk about his plants. And these are 3 folios, or actually, well, 1 page with 3 parts. It's upstairs in display, and we can see here the agave in detail with a stamen and petal and pistil. And here starts an incredible correspondence, which I learned today is the 3rd largest in number of letters, correspondence of Linnaeus. They never met, but Jacquin writes to him eagerly. They write bi-monthly, or sometimes it takes a little bit more time. Sometimes Linnaeus doesn't reply, and Jacquin writes saying, have you received my letter of such date? If you are not interested in replying to me, I will not write to you again. So he was a prickly fellow, and this is probably why Jacquin named this Jacquinia armillaris with a prickle in the end of the leaf in honor of him. This is actually the 1763 edition, the engraving of Jacquin's plants. This is a proof that is here at the Society. It was sent in a letter. This is a proof engraving sent in a letter to Linnaeus, and it's of the same plant, and this is a rough proof of this other engraving later. Jacquin sends Linnaeus, as we can see upstairs, details. This is in the envelope of the plants he had seen. But this one in particular, this double-winged fruit, is of Gyrocarpus americanus, here pictured in the luxury edition, but of which there is a specimen in Vienna. But these specimens come from the live plants growing in Schönbrunn. So he was able to see these plants in flower and fruit and sometimes describe them from the living specimen. In his writings, he tells us of how he actually made our knowledge of American plants much better. He talks about Plumier, and we can see Plumier's Cocoloba and Jacquin's Cocoloba, and he was very proud of making a better Cocoloba. Or we can see Sloane's and others, Annona's, Plumier, Sloane, Mary and Sibylla, and this is Jacquin's Annona muricata, which comes from his original drawing in the field, actually by van der Schott, his gardener companion, and the larger edition, Annona muricata. So he was very proud, and he talks about this in his descriptions, how he thought that he had made this better. The texture of the leaves, the size of the flowers, and the texture of the petals were now rightly described. So there's another interesting thing about this frontispiece. We see here Mahonia, so Swietenia mahonia, named by Jacquin in order of Van Swieten. But this Swietenia, he never illustrated inside the book, only in the frontispiece. And when you look at it, and then you see this little lizard, and you see this bird, the tropic bird. I was very lucky to have a person in an art gallery look at this, and he said, immediately, he said, oops, it's not coming. Okay. These are Catesby's. So these are copies of Catesby's, and Catesby found the Swietenia in the Bahamas, the Swietenia mahogany, but it was correctly named as we know it by Jacquin. And so the Swietenia is exactly the same. So these are copies, which was not uncommon at the time. In 1780, he, after now having been director of the garden, he publishes his Flora of Americas again as a luxury edition with beautiful frontispieces by the Bauer brothers, which don't do credit to what's inside. All these plants and animals are from Europe. Some of them are pretty, some of them are less pretty, but the whole content is the American plants. And I found in the descriptions, this is a rough print, probably the first proof of his book, without ornamentation. And then I found a different typesetting, a completely different typesetting, which you can see here on your right of this. And there's only two copies that I know that have this typesetting. This is the Q copy and the Spanish copy at Real Madrid Real Botánico in Madrid. And the reason may have been that there is a letter of somebody from the court of Spain asking for a copy for the king. And they were already all commissioned. So Jacquin asked the Pope to see if he can relinquish his copy. And we don't know what the response was, but we do know that the copy at Q and in Spain are different typesets. So he may have had it typeset again, the whole book, to take care of these two new subscribers. I don't know how the Q copy arrived here. Another interesting thing about Jacquin's drawings is that in the small folio edition, he has he tries to do everything to life in scale. In the first folio edition, he can only fit the leaves of the pistia. In the large folio, he can fit the whole plant. And then of the 350 illustrations that we know that he brought with him and that Savages saw and writes to Linnaeus, we only have 14 of them available at the Natural History Museum in Vienna. And these are the ones to your left. In the middle, we see to scale the engravings of the first edition of the Selectarum in 1763, and in the left to your right. And then the left, you see the larger folio edition of 1780. And this we can see for several of his plants, the plumerias, the saguaras, this is the cordia, and several of his plants, we have the originals, but only of a few of them. The anacardium, and there are some odd ones, like this annona, which has this thing, which may be the lobes of what used to be called Rollinia, but attached to a branch, strangely attached to a branch of some other Annonaceae, which was probably Annona muricata, Crescentias, and others, and orchids, and clusias. He later on, his son publishes the birds. These were living birds in Schönbrunn, and we know very little about the animals, but some illustrations have surfaced in the internet on auctions, on art auctions of animals. And this is the tree anteater, which he mentions that he sent several specimens. And these are by Schiedel, by Franz von Schiedel, and they are mainly in private collections, and we know very little of them. But the animals is another interesting thing. We don't know of him being, well, he wasn't a zoologist, he couldn't name him. But I found in a later edition of the Systema Natura that Linnaeus names a lot of his animals based on the descriptions that Jacquin had sent to him in letters. And Linnaeus properly credits them with de Jacquin, Descriptione Jacquin. So, all these plants and animals that are known to have been collected, I have put them in this volume as a first the whole itinerary, his early days, his education, the itinerary, and the publication of his works, and with a list of modern names for the plants he collected. And I have been very lucky to live in the country where he did most of his work, or a lot of his work. He only spent 8 months in Cartagena, but of the almost 600 species that he talks about, not all of them named by him, about half are from the continent. And this, he must have been very, very impressed by the diversity when he reaches the continent. So somehow the flora of the Caribbean is a dry forest, somewhat depauperate flora, and once he reaches the continent, he finds all these new things. He has exact localities of the Popa, which is this mountain in the back, which we can see here from close by. This is a famous mountain in Colombia, and I am now using this flora, which dates from the 1700s, to look at the diversity of this incredible ecosystem, the dry forest ecosystem of the northern coast of Colombia, of which, if one tallies up the known flora today, almost 25% of the plants have a jack on them, either, as I said, parenthetical or as a proper author. So it has been an incredible journey through Jacquin, and I have learned a lot, and I have learned a lot from the sources that are available, especially as time went by. More and more things were becoming available in the internet. As I said at first, I was only able to be in Vienna for a few hours at the archives, and nowadays all these letters, all these documents are available online, and this is an incredible opportunity for us to find out about things such as Jacquin's travel and the history of botany in general. So I leave you with that, and thank you very much for your attention.